The former president of Zimbabwe, the late Robert Mugabe, constantly reminded his listeners that Zimbabwe was a sovereign state. For instance, he's quoted here saying, "So Blair, keep your England and let me keep my Zimbabwe." But what is nationalism? Why is patriotism a poison in melanin-dominant human minds? If we rid ourselves of patriotism, what can we replace it with? Is African sovereignty benefiting Africans or Europe? Welcome. Our discussion today is African nationalism European? First, let us answer what is nationalism, and we do it narrowly and broadly at the same time. Then we consider other issues relevant to this very critical political observation. Our major goal is to demonstrate how African nationalism is benefiting Europe and almost everyone else except black people or melanin-dominant people anywhere on earth. And that because of that, we are likely to hand over Africa to China without even firing a bullet. And what can we do to stop that from happening? Let us define nationalism. Nationalism originated in Europe as a European concept for a nation-state based population with common links. It popularized sovereignty and also allowed each state to form its own government. The origins of nationalism, a term that borders on the word nation. A nation is when a body of people feels a sense of unity based on common historical, linguistic, and religious or cultural traditions, and identifies with a particular geographical location. Nations have an independent government, and they are called nation states. This is the reality on earth today, but there are caveats in all this. If you are excited that you are a Zimbabwean, that you are a Nigerian, that you are a Namibian, a Kenyan, a South African, a Mozambican, an Angolan, how did you get that national identity? How did you become a member of that state? For most countries, patriotism is one of the duties required of citizens. But what exactly is patriotism? The Cambridge Dictionary defines patriotism as the feeling of loving your country more than any others and being proud of it. Other dictionaries talk about having an attachment to the ethnicity, culture, and history of your country. But who would give us these countries? How would we define these countries? Have you agreed to the definitions of the borders of these countries? Who is benefiting from the borders of these countries? And why must we obey and observe these borders? To the point of formulating opinions against other melanin-dominant humans who happen to come from another boundary. Clearly, African nationalism is sustaining European African borders. To be patriotic is a mental poison in the human mind, in the melanin-dominant human mind. The 1984 Berlin Conference shaped the subsequent colonization of Africa. The borders we boast of today, in which we establish our national ethos and nationalism and patriotism and sovereignty and respect of territorial integrity of these countries, are European. And were formulated by European colonists. And that was done for Europe not to fight or amongst themselves. But now, we cannot think out of this paradox. So the existence of political and cultural boundaries are not African at all. Therefore, your patriotism, nationalism, sovereignty ideals are sustaining Euro-Gentile borders in Africa. Just marinate and think about that. If we rid ourselves of patriotism or these borders, what can we replace it with? Totemism, Ubuntu, UNU, Isintu, and ancient origins. That's all. But there were pre-colonial complexities. We have to agree to that. And to be fair, Africa was very sensitive to migration and tensions and tribal warfares and territorial conflicts. You can see this is the map of Africa before the Berlin Conference. You can see it was just small little pieces and boundaries, and yet this should have been our greatest advantage of all. We have to tell you that the Middle East is part of Africa, and here the maps are removing it for political purposes. Perhaps even on a wider scale, the conflicts could have been minimized, but to ignore them today is not to be doing justice to the fundamentals of our own humanity as melanin dominant humans. So each day, today, melanin dominant humans, when they think about their country and national identity, it's unfortunate that we adopt and think about this or about it within the limits of European predetermined boundaries. This makes it easy for us to kill and attack each other, even to the point of calling another African in Africa a foreigner. How come our politicians and even the masses fail to see this open reality? Why can we not realize that once we transcend these little divisions, we have the glue to forge a United States of Africa, because it identifies as political, as melanin dominant humans, Bantus, Abantu, Vanu, based on our morphology and skin color. We continue to kill and attack each other, even to the point of calling another African in Africa a foreigner. At the same time, we embrace and cow down and give too much respect to the Chinese, to the Indians and Europeans. Why? And how is this so? Because of the colonial Berlin Conference border mentality that has been planted in us. See, in 1983, Nigeria expelled 2 million undocumented West African migrants. Documented by who? Whose borders? How do you call them? Or people from Ghanaians, and they call yourself Nigerians. Whose borders do you observe? And the bags they used became a symbol for this abuse. An African cannot be a foreigner in any part of Africa, as well as the Middle East, as well as all the other parts where we are indigenous and autochthonous. The new scramble for Africa continues in very subtle and very deadly ways, and we may never survive this one, because the Chinese are here for something more than even our own being. Any politician, any businessman, any student of politics, any member of the melanin dominant human in Africa who does not understand the Patriotism principle becomes a fool in the hands of the Chinese businessmen, bribes, as well as territorial desires. Get this book, Patriotism Principle, The Great Secret of Asia, and understand that we are almost going to be food for another race within maybe the next 4 to 5 years. Mark my words, but let us refer people to the Patriotism principles. African nationalism is credited as a force that drove the liberation struggle for Africa. Is this true or a huge lie? Well, but from the perspective we are coming from, it is an ideological crippled thought. It's unfortunate our brothers and sisters perished and died in these wars and liberation struggles, but they were ideological limitations and subterfuges and subtle caveats which all the guerrilla movements, the wars and the fighters did not surpass or scramble or jump over. Now, ideological confusion was based on the borders. Why were boundaries stable following decolonization? Because they crafted the African Union or Organization of African Union so that it agreed to a policy of inviolable borders, which dictated that colonial-era boundaries were to be upheld. Mistake or European ideology. They ignored the foundational fact The overt purpose of the Berlin Conference was to manage the ongoing process of colonization in Africa, the scramble as it was dubbed by the Times columnist, so as to avoid the outbreak of armed conflict between rival colonial powers. Its outcome was the conclusion of a general act ratified by all major colonial powers, including the United States. We need this to be dismantled, this ratification to be destroyed, removed, and thrown in the garbage bin. We cannot do it via our politicians. How has the African Union used nationalism in Africa to sustain European strategy? We have already indicated that Nkrumah versus Nyerere. Nkrumah clashed with several parochial political leaders like Julius Nyerere of Tanzania, who believed that Nkrumah's idea of an immediate unified Africa was unrealistic. They believed that a gradual approach to unity was ideal. They were lost. Totally dumb. This was probably a deadly mistake, but a deliberate mistake, because it is clear that some of the leaders were in excellent books with European leaders, and the French were pulling a lot of strings even up to today. And we know why it is like that, or why it was like that, because Nkrumah was later removed and toppled through a machination by Europe. That's clear. Unfortunately, millions of melanin-dominant human Bantus in Africa today accept Julius Nyerere's dead-end approach for gradual unity. It's useless. It will never work. Though not a perfect political leader, but on many points, Kwame Nkrumah was spot on and shockingly correct. Remember what he said: no sporadic act, no pious resolution can resolve our present problems. Nothing will be of valid except the united act of a united Africa. That's what we need to remove the Berlin Union Conference Act. We have to enact a United Africa Act. We can do it at the masses level. We are going to craft a document we are going to float and share with as many people for signatures on this, so that we start to have grassroots movements for a united Africa and an act to put that into effect. It's not Pan-Africanism. It's nothing of the sort. It's built on Pan-Africanism. It goes beyond Pan-Africanism, because we are going to use totemism across the whole earth for indigenous people of any part of the earth. Organization of African Union and the African Union goals mimic European Union missions. You can read them here. We are showing them there. They are the same. The last step. What is the state of Africa in the world today? The European presence has, however, shifted from overt and direct to more subtle forms. While military occupation and sovereign control over African territories have all but been eliminated, political influence, economic preponderance, and cultural conditioning remain in place. Europe crafted an African decolonization dependent system. So in summary, therefore, here is what we have learned. Boundary disputes and contested territories abound in modern as well as ancient Africa. However, aren't we enlightened today to realize that any melanin-dominant human is a brother and a sister, minus the borders and the identities and idiosyncrasies crafted to divide us? Can we honestly fail to identify the real foreigner in Africa, the Chinese and the European, and as well as many others that are coming to exploit and go back to their places of origin outside of Africa? If you are excited that you are a Zimbabwean, South African, Nigerian, Namibian, Kenyan, Tanzanian, Burundian, Rwandese, or anything, who told you and gave you that national identity? It's Europe. What is the difference between patriotism and nationalism? No difference at all. But one drives the other. Patriotism drives nationalism. It's a zeal in Bantus. At the end, they fight against each other to retain the paradox that were crafted for them by Europe. But what is African nationalism then? It's a European political program operating in a melanin-dominant human mind. Why is patriotism a poison in melanin-dominant human mind? Because it causes what we call race denial. If we rid ourselves of patriotism, what can we use to replace it with redefined Ubuntu, as well as totems and many other cultural pointers already prevalent all over Africa, pre-colonial, minus Islam, Judaism, and Christianity? When you go back to that core value, we can polish it, we can polish that diamond and live well. And have a political ideology. Is African sovereignty benefiting Africans or Europe? Europe. African nationalism is credited as a force that drove the liberation of Africa. Is this true or a huge lie? We are not liberated at all. How has the African Union used nationalism in Africa to sustain European strategy? They ignored the question of borders deliberately. So this is our state. If you are interested in Afro Salvation matters, send us an email on join@marifado.com and visit our website www.marifado.com. Since African nationalism is European, let us dump it today. Subscribe to our channel, Committee Iburu Ethics, Marifado came. This is priest teacher Rabbi LM Dumizulu. Till we meet again, Edupe Siabonga Tatenta Henkos.